The Dutch once ruled the world. So how did this empire collapse? And more importantly, which country is next facing the same danger? History is usually taught to us as an explosion of events. We are told about the dramatic collapse of empires and states as if they vanish in a single, violent moment. We imagine bandits and barbarians smashing the gates of Rome, bombs raining down on Berlin, or executions in the streets of Paris. We are conditioned to believe that the end of a powerful empire must be loud, brutal, and visible to everyone at a specific moment in time. But that is a story. The reality is this: empires are not murdered. Empires commit suicide. Right now, we are witnessing the final days of the American state. If you're waiting for a sudden collapse, a historic day when the stock market hits zero and the dollar becomes worthless, you are looking for the wrong model. You're looking for the Roman model. The model you should be studying is the Dutch model. In the 18th century, the Dutch Republic was a power the world admired. It possessed the global reserve currency, the strongest navy, the most advanced financial system, and the highest standard of living in human history. They owned the world. And yet, within 50 years, slowly, quietly, and methodically, they ceased to be a superpower. They did not lose a catastrophic war that flattened their homeland. They did not suffer a plague that wiped out their population. Instead, they were undone by something far more subtle. The upper classes, merchants, politicians, craftsmen began to realize something fundamental. There was no longer any growth left at home. They recognized that the cost of maintaining the empire was higher than the profits it generated. So they made a cold, rational, and profitable decision. They decided to move their wealth abroad. They chose to lend their capital to their enemies. To protect their own fortunes, they chose to destroy the accumulated wealth of their own country. They exited the empire before it collapsed. To understand what is happening in the United States today, why bridges are rusting while stock markets hit all-time highs, and why the middle class is evaporating. We must look back to Amsterdam in 1780. The similarities are not just striking, they are terrifying. The Dutch model is a blueprint for how a hegemonic power hollows itself out. It is the story of how a productive nation becomes a nation of speculators, and how a ruling class separates its fate from that of its people. Let us begin at the height of Dutch power. In the 1600s, the Dutch were the workshop of the world. They were innovators, not traditionalists. They built sawmills. They perfected the flight ship, capable of carrying more cargo with fewer crew than any rival vessel. They mastered the art of wind power. They were a resource-poor but industrious nation. They imported raw timber and iron, processed them with superior technology, and exported finished ships and machinery. This efficiency generated an extraordinary surplus of capital. Amsterdam became the richest city in the world because it was the most productive and hard-working city in the world. The Dutch guilder was not the world's reserve currency by military decree, but because everyone wanted Dutch goods. The currency was backed by the sweat, engineering, and physical output of the Dutch economy. But success breeds a specific kind of cancer. As the Dutch grew wealthier, wages rose. Living standards soared. Building ships in Amsterdam became expensive compared to emerging rivals in England and France. Dutch labor grew accustomed to luxury. They were no longer the hungry, driven innovators of the previous generation. They became the comfortable, complacent heirs of a great fortune. And this is where the turning point begins. The cancer metastasizes. Dutch capital holders, the merchant families who ran the economy, looked at the numbers. The Bank of Amsterdam and the Dutch East India Company saw that returns on domestic investment were declining. Labor was too expensive. Regulations were too burdensome. The domestic market was saturated. So they asked a fatal question: why manage factories and deal with workers when we can simply lend money? And thus, the Dutch Republic shifted from a production economy to a financial economy. They evolved from the workshop of the world into the banker of the world. Economists celebrate this moment as a sign of development and call it financialization. They claim it is the natural evolution of an advanced nation. In reality, it is the beginning of the death spiral. When an empire stops producing things and starts making money for money, it signs its own death warrant. Throughout the 1700s, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange turned into a casino. Dutch elites created complex financial instruments, derivatives, and futures contracts. They inflated bubbles in exotic assets. As the numbers in their ledgers rose, they believed themselves richer than ever before. But the physical economy was rotting. Shipyards began to close. Skilled engineers died without replacements. Fishing fleets shrank. The middle class, the backbone of the Golden Age, began to fracture. The wealthy did not care. They had already found a new home for their wealth. They looked across the channel to their great rival, Great Britain. Britain in the 1700s was what the Dutch once had been, hungry, aggressive, and industrializing. Britain wanted to build an empire, but it needed money. The Dutch elites had all of it. Here lies the ultimate betrayal of the Dutch model. Dutch bankers began lending vast sums to the British government and British companies. They bought British bonds. They invested in the British East India Company, the direct rival of their own national interests. In the end, they financed the very navy that would blockade their ports and destroy their economy. Why did they do it? Because the returns were higher. A Dutch banker did not care whether the flag flying over the ocean was Dutch or British. As long as interest payments arrived on time, capital had no homeland. This was the great exit. Not a physical exit of people packing their bags, but a financial exit, the migration of value. The Dutch elites continued to live in their grand canal houses in Amsterdam. They still wore their extravagant wigs and attended lavish balls. But their wealth was no longer tied to the health of the Dutch Republic. If Holland collapsed, they would remain rich as long as their assets were safely parked in London, earning 5% interest guaranteed by the British Crown. They had disconnected themselves. They built an escape tunnel for themselves and left its entrance open for anyone with capital. Now, let us turn to the United States. We encounter the exact same cycle. The timelines align almost perfectly. From 1945 to 1970, the United States experienced its golden age of production. It was the workshop of the world. America produced the steel, the cars, the electronics. The dollar was king because American industry was king. Then the same pressures emerged. Costs exploded. Regulations increased. The rest of the world caught up. And just like the Dutch, American elites turned away. In the 1980s and 1990s, we decided that manufacturing was dirty and outdated. We declared that the future lay in services and finance. We began dismantling the physical economy. Factories were moved to China, Mexico, and Vietnam. American workers were told this was good for them, that they would enjoy cheaper goods at Walmart. In reality, we were repeating the Dutch pivot. We shut down the engine of value creation and replaced it with an engine of financial extraction. Wall Street replaced Detroit. Derivatives replaced manufactured goods. And just like Amsterdam, the numbers rose. GDP increased. Stock markets soared. Elites congratulated themselves on their brilliance. They coined terms like the Great Moderation and claimed they had solved the boom and bust cycle. In truth, they were burning the furniture to heat the house. Financialization, as in the Netherlands, created an enormous surplus of capital at the top. And that capital had to go somewhere. That IT could not be invested in American factories. They were closed. It could not be invested in American infrastructure. Returns were too low. So where did it go? It went global. It financed China's industrialization. Just as Dutch capital financed Britain's rise, American financial elites financed China's rise. American capital built factories in Shenzhen. It enabled technology transfers. It bought the IPOs of Chinese giants. The logic was identical. Why pay an American worker $25 an hour when I can pay a Chinese worker $2 an hour and pocket the difference? This is the betrayal. American elites separated their wealth from the American nation. Today, if the U.S. economy enters a recession, Apple does not collapse. Apple has customers in India, Europe, and China. If the U.S. dollar collapses, BlackRock does not collapse. BlackRock holds assets in every currency and jurisdiction. They hedge their risks. They executed the Dutch exit. They are physically present in New York and Washington, but their loyalty is not. Global capital now flows not toward the land or people of the United States, but away from them, just as it once flowed out of the Netherlands. But the Dutch model is not only about where the money goes. It is also about what happens to the society left behind. By the late 1700s, as the Dutch economy collapsed, society polarized and decayed. The wealthy retreated into gated communities and high society, obsessed with status, fashion, and petty court intrigue. This was the era of towering wigs and monumental ignorance. Meanwhile, the poor were condemned to misery. Poverty in Dutch cities became legendary. Riots erupted. Rage filled the streets. But there was no solution because the resources needed to fix the problem had already been shipped to London. Now look at America. America has its own periwig era, a culture obsessed with celebrity, identity politics, and distraction. A media apparatus that keeps the population fighting over cultural issues, bathrooms, statues, while the economic foundations rot. This is not accidental. It is a feature of decline. Elites no longer provide prosperity. They provide spectacle. They provide the circus. And while the public is distracted, elites quietly remove the last gold from a vault. The mechanism of this modern exit is more complex than in the 18th century, but the outcome is the same. The Dutch use bonds and merchant banks. American elites use the Eurodollar system, offshore tax havens, and now digital ledgers. Debt plays a central role in the final stages of the Dutch Republic. The state borrowed heavily to maintain the illusion of power. It borrowed to keep the navy afloat. It borrowed to fund welfare. It borrowed to pay interest on existing debt. And from whom did it borrow? From its own wealthy citizens. This creates a perverse incentive. Elites want the state to remain indebted because interest payments represent a transfer of wealth from taxpayers to bondholders. When the U.S. government runs a $1 trillion deficit, that money does not vanish. It flows to contractors, pharmaceutical companies, banks, and ultimately into the pockets of those who hold the debt. The middle class pays through taxes or inflation. That value is siphoned upward as rent to the elite. This is a vampiric system. IT feeds a passive economy by draining the productive one. Eventually, the host begins to die. The debt grows too large to service. The currency begins to lose credibility. In 1780, the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War broke out. Reality arrived. The Dutch realized too late that their navy was hollow, ships outdated, sailors untrained, treasury empty. Britain crushed them. The Bank of Amsterdam, the heart of global finance for 170 years, declared bankruptcy. It had secretly loaned its gold reserves to the already insolvent Dutch East India Company. The illusion shattered. The Dutch Golden Age ended not with an explosion, but with the whisper of a bankruptcy. The United States is approaching its own Bank of Amsterdam moment. IT holds over $35 trillion in federal debt and more than $100 trillion in total obligations. It faces unfunded liabilities in Social Security and Medicare. It has the most expensive military in history, yet struggles with recruitment and fleet maintenance. It is hollow, but elites know this. They are not stupid. They have the best data in the world. They know the math does not work. They know the debt can never truly be repaid. What is the plan? The Great Detachment. The plan is to convert paper assets denominated in a dying currency into tangible assets and network assets that can survive the transition. This is why billionaires are buying farmland. This is why they are buying sports teams. This is why they are buying art. These are assets that inflation cannot erase. More importantly, this is why we see a shift toward cryptocurrencies and the cloud in the Dutch era. Moving gold to London was heavy, dangerous, and slow. Today, billions of dollars in value can be transferred digitally in seconds. Bitcoin and the broader crypto ecosystem are often presented as tools for the common person to fight power. That may be true, but look at who is buying up BlackRock. Fidelity, Silicon Valley venture capitalists. They are building on-ramps to the new world. They are moving capital from the state ledger, the dollar system, to network ledgers and blockchains. They are preparing for the day when U.S. Treasury bonds are no longer the world's risk-free asset. When that day comes, when the dollar loses its status, the American state will face a biblical crisis. It will not be able to import goods. It will not be able to fund its military. The average American standard of living will collapse by 30, 40, or even 50% overnight. A harsher, poorer reality will arrive. But the elites will be fine. They may even be richer, owning scarce assets, land, energy, algorithms, and digital currencies priced in whatever new money emerges. They will sit comfortably in luxury apartments in Manhattan or bunkers in New Zealand, having successfully exited a collapsing empire. This exit is not only about money. It is about legal authority. In the Dutch era, elites trusted international law to protect their investments in Britain. Today, we are witnessing the rise of private law. Corporations increasingly resolve disputes through private arbitration rather than public courts. Special economic zones proliferate. They effectively detach from national legal systems. Read the terms of service of major tech platforms. You submit not to constitutional law, but to their law. They can deplatform you, seize digital assets, and silence you without due process. This is the new feudalism. Cloud lords are the new aristocracy, accountable to neither presidents nor parliaments. The tragedy of the Dutch model lies in the population's response. Until the end, the average Dutch citizen believed they lived in the greatest country on earth. They looked at the beautiful buildings, the art, the history, and convinced themselves it could never end. The idea that Amsterdam might become a second-rate city was laughable. This arrogance blinded them. They responded too slowly. They hoarded currency instead of gold. They trusted the Bank of Amsterdam when they should have withdrawn deposits. Americans suffer from the same blindness that we have a religious belief in American exceptionalism. We believe the laws of gravity do not apply to us. We think we can print unlimited money without inflation. We believe we can deindustrialize without poverty. We believe our military is invincible despite losing war after war. This arrogance is anesthesia, used by elites to keep the patient calm while organs are harvested. Look at Dutch infrastructure. As capital fled, the dikes and canals, the nation's lifeblood, fell into disrepair. Maintenance was postponed because it was too expensive. Now look at America's power grid. Look at the water systems in Jackson, Mississippi, or Flint, Michigan. Look at train derailments. This is deferred maintenance, the visible footprint of capital flight. Money that should repair rail lines goes to stock buybacks. Money that should modernize the grid goes to servicing debt. We are cannibalizing the physical nation to feed the financial beast. And just as in the Netherlands, we are witnessing the rise of a rentier class. In the 1700s, a young Dutchman no longer aspired to be an explorer or inventor. He wanted to live off government bond interest. Today, American youth aspire to be influencers or investors. We want to get rich without working. We want passive income. We want to gamble on meme stocks. This cultural shift reflects economic reality. When work no longer pays, people stop working. When speculation pays, people start gambling. That a nation of gamblers cannot compete with a nation of builders. That is why the rise of the East is inevitable. While we debate stock valuations, they pour concrete. While we trade derivatives, they mine lithium. America forgot the lesson the Dutch forgot. Material wealth is a claim on reality, not reality itself. You cannot eat bonds. You cannot live inside a stock certificate. When basic production collapses, financial paper becomes worthless. Elites understand this. That is why they are buying real things. Watch the farmland acquisitions by Bill Gates and others. Watch water rights. Watch private energy infrastructure investments. Before the music stops, they are exchanging paper claims for tangible reality. There is one more overlooked dimension of the Dutch model: the loss of maritime dominance. The Dutch Empire was built on its navy. But navies are extraordinarily expensive. As the economy financialized, taxpayers revolted against defense costs. Budget cuts followed. Wealthy investors, already invested in British ships, had no incentive to maintain the Dutch fleet. It was left to rot. When war came, the Dutch Navy was a ghost. Today, the U.S. Navy secures global trade routes, from the Strait of Hormuz to the Malacca Strait to the Red Sea. But costs are becoming unsustainable. The pressure to cut is mounting. The fleet is overstretched and undermaintained. Most critically, the U.S. merchant marine has disappeared. How many ships do you see flying the American flag? Almost none. The logistics of national survival have been outsourced. If war erupts in the Pacific, there is no commercial fleet to supply troops or feed the population. Ships were sold. Stocks were bought. So how does the story end? If we follow the Dutch scenario, it does not end in apocalypse. The Netherlands still exists. Amsterdam is still beautiful, but it is a museum, a tourist destination, no longer a shaper of history. It became a satellite of the British Empire, then of the European Union. It lost sovereignty. It lost its future. For a century after collapse, living standards stagnated. America's decline will be harsher, because America is larger and its society more violent. The most likely outcome is the Brazilianization of America: extreme wealth at the top, fortified enclaves surrounded by widespread poverty and instability. The federal government will remain, but weak, debt-ridden, and incapable of solving major problems. Real power will reside in corporations and decentralized networks. The U.S. empire will still exist on maps, but as a hollow shell. Action will move elsewhere. The new London is not necessarily Beijing. That is a common mistake. The world has changed. The new empire is not a place. It is a digital layer that sits atop the world. Power is not moving to Shanghai. It is moving to blockchains, AI hubs, private cities. Elites are not fleeing to China. They are fleeing to the internet. They are building a civilization governed by smart contracts instead of parliaments, a virtual realm. This is techno-feudalism, the Dutch model. What brought America here is simple. When the nation-state becomes a bad investment, investors build a new one. They're doing it now and leaving you with a bill. The inflation you feel is the liquidation of the old regime. Every price increase is your labor being transferred into their exit liquidity. So what can you do? If the ship is sinking and the captain has already taken a lifeboat, what is the passenger strategy? First, accept the diagnosis. Stop waiting for politicians to fix the country. They cannot. Incentives are aligned against fixing it. The math is clear. Second, adopt the mindset of the Dutch elite, not the Dutch peasant. The peasant waited for the government and starved. The elite saw reality and diversified. You must diversify your life. Do not hold 100% of your assets in US dollars. Do not place 100% faith in U.S. pension systems. Hold assets with global value. Gold, Bitcoin, globally demanded skills. Third, separate your identity from the empire. The Dutch example shows us that empires are not killed. They are dismantled and sold piece by piece. For more content like this, keep following Marcus.